The city breathed differently at 2:30 a.m. Dallas, usually a symphony of commerce and ambition, became a hushed, alien landscape. The towering skyscrapers, proud and gleaming in the Texas sun, now stood as silent obsidian sentinels against a star-pricked, inky canvas. Their darkened windows were like countless vacant eyes, staring down with an unnerving dispassion. The usual roar of traffic had dwindled to a sporadic whisper, a lone car sighing its way through deserted streets, its headlights cutting transient, lonely paths through the gloom. Even the ever-present Texas wind seemed to hold its breath, or perhaps it carried secrets too heavy for the waking world to bear. This was the Dallas few knew, a place stripped of its daytime bravado, revealing an older, more primal countenance. A strange stillness settled over the concrete and steel. It was a stillness that hummed with an unseen energy, a feeling that the city itself was a sleeping beast, its dreams filled with shadows and disquiet. The familiar landmarks, Reunion Tower and the Pegasus sign, seemed less like beacons and more like ancient cryptic symbols under the pale moonlight. Streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like spectral figures with every flicker of their tired bulbs. Alleyways, mere thoroughfares by day, transformed into gaping maws, promising nothing but darkness and the unknown. The air, usually thick with the scent of exhaust and distant barbecue, now carried a cleaner, sharper aroma, tinged with the dampness of dew settling on unseen grass and the metallic tang of urban decay. This nocturnal Dallas was a world unto itself, a separate reality existing in the hours when most of its inhabitants were lost in slumber. The vibrant murals on deep Ellum's walls, so full of life and color under the sun, now appeared muted, their figures contorted into grotesque shapes by the play of light and shadow. The parks, playgrounds for families and pets during daylight, became patches of impenetrable black, where the rustling of leaves sounded like furtive whispers. It was a time when the imagination, unchecked by the mundane realities of the day, could run wild, conjuring phantoms from the ordinary. The city felt ancient, its modern facade a thin veneer over something far older and less tamed. The silence was the most unnerving part. Not a complete absence of sound, for the city was never truly silent, but a hushing of its usual boisterous voice. The distant hum of the freeway, the occasional mournful wail of a far-off train, the rhythmic click of a faulty traffic signal. These were the only sounds that punctuated the profound quiet. They served not to comfort but to emphasize the vast emptiness. It was in this silent, watchful city that Ethan found his peculiar solace, a solace that was about to be violently, irrevocably shattered. The Dallas he thought he knew, the one that offered him a quiet refuge, was about to show him its hidden, terrifying face. Ethan wasn't a creature of the night by choice, not entirely. Insomnia, that old unwelcome friend, often kept him company into the small hours. He lived on the 7th floor of an apartment building that overlooked a moderately busy street, though at this hour busy was a relative term. His ritual was simple, born of necessity and a quiet resignation. A cup of chamomile tea, its steam coiling like a gentle spirit in the dim lamplight of his living room. A book, usually something old and comforting, its pages softened by countless readings, and the window, his portal to the sleeping city, a silent movie playing out below. He found a strange peace in this routine, a sense of being a lone observer in a world temporarily paused. He would sit in his worn armchair, the fabric molded to his form over years of these nocturnal vigils. The city lights, even muted, cast a soft glow into his apartment, painting shifting patterns on the walls. He rarely felt lonely. The city itself was his companion, its quiet breathing a counterpoint to his own. Sometimes he just watched the traffic lights cycle through their lonely sequence. Red, amber, green, red again, a pointless ballet for an audience of none. He knew the rhythm of the late-night delivery trucks, the occasional stumble of a late-night reveler, the distant bark of a dog. These were the familiar sounds of his quiet world, predictable and therefore safe. Tonight, the tea was particularly soothing, the book a familiar tale of adventure in a faraway land. His apartment was his sanctuary, a small pocket of warmth and order in the vast, indifferent sprawl of Dallas. He had arranged his books just so, his few possessions neat and tidy. It was a defense, perhaps, against the chaos he sometimes felt churning just beneath the surface of his own mind, and certainly beneath the surface of the city. The window was his favorite spot, a frame for the ever-changing yet ever-constant urban vista. He felt a connection to the sleeping metropolis, a sense of belonging that eluded him in the bright, noisy clamor of the day. He wasn't hiding from the world, not exactly. He was simply observing it from a safe, comfortable distance, a spectator in the grand theater of the night. Tonight, the air outside was unusually still. The usual breeze that rattled his window pane was absent. The city seemed to be holding its breath, a premonition he couldn't quite grasp. Ethan sipped his tea, his gaze drifting from the pages of his book to the street below. A single taxi cruised by, its yellow light a brief slash of color in the monochrome night. He watched it disappear around the corner, a small, insignificant event. He felt a familiar sense of calm settle over him. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the loudest sound in his small world. He was unaware, blissfully so, that this particular night, this particular moment of peace, was the last he would know for a very long time. The curtain was about to rise on a different kind of show. It began subtly, a disruption in the night's usual muted soundtrack. Ethan, lulled by the tea and the familiar cadence of his book, almost missed it. A slight scuffling sound from the street below, like shoes dragging reluctantly on the pavement. He frowned, lowering his book. It wasn't the confident stride of someone heading home, nor the hurried pace of someone late. This was different, hesitant, fearful perhaps. He leaned closer to the window, his breath misting the cool glass. The street lamp on the corner cast a sickly orange glow, illuminating a small patch of sidewalk and the entrance to a narrow alleyway between two darkened storefronts. He saw nothing at first, just the empty stage. Then a flicker of movement. Two figures, one taller, broader, cloaked in shadow, the other smaller, seemingly struggling. Ethan's heart gave a little jump, a premonitory flutter. This wasn't the usual late-night fare, this felt wrong. He watched, a knot tightening in his stomach. The larger figure seemed to be manhandling the smaller one, pushing them towards the black maw of the alley. There was a desperate, muffled cry, quickly stifled. Ethan pressed his face against the glass, his comfortable detachment evaporating like morning mist. He could just make out the glint of something metallic in the taller figure's hand. Not a key, not a phone, something that caught the streetlight in a cruel, sharp flash. Suddenly a scream, not muffled this time, sharp, piercing, and full of a terror so pure it seemed to freeze the air in Ethan's lungs. It was a sound that ripped through the night's quiet fabric, a raw, animalistic cry of ultimate pain and fear. It echoed off the surrounding buildings, bouncing back and forth before being swallowed by the city's vast indifference. Ethan recoiled from the window as if struck. His teacup clattered from his numb fingers, shattering on the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden ringing silence that followed the scream. He stared horrified at the dark stain spreading on his rug, then back to the alley. One figure was now slumped against the brick wall, a dark shape against the darker shadows. The other figure, the taller one, stepped back. He saw the taller figure glance up and down the street, a quick, furtive movement. For a horrifying second, Ethan thought their eyes met his, a seventh-floor window in a building full of them. But it was impossible. The figure then turned and melted into the deeper shadows of the alley, disappearing as if they were never there, vanished, gone, leaving behind only the slumped form and the chilling echo of that terrible scream. Ethan stood frozen, his blood like ice water in his veins. The city outside, just moments ago a source of quiet comfort, now seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The silence that returned was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, accusatory, stained. The world tilted. Ethan's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. His living room, his sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The familiar objects, the bookshelf, the worn armchair, the shattered teacup on the floor seemed alien, distorted. The city lights outside, once a gentle glow, now pulsed with a menacing throb like the heartbeat of some monstrous, unseen entity. Disbelief warred with the horrifying clarity of what he had just witnessed. It couldn't be. Not here. Not in his quiet corner of Dallas. Murders happened on the news, in gritty crime dramas, in faraway, dangerous places. They didn't unfold like a grotesque puppet show right below your window, under the indifferent gaze of a Tuesday morning streetlight. His legs felt like lead, but he stumbled back to the window, drawn by a morbid, undeniable compulsion. The slumped figure was still there, unmoving. A dark stain was beginning to spread on the pavement beneath it, black in the orange lamplight. It was real, utterly terrifyingly real. The peace he had cultivated over countless nights like this was gone, shattered into a million irreparable pieces, just like his teacup. In its place, a cold, visceral fear began to bloom, unfurling its icy tendrils around his heart, squeezing the air from his lungs. The city, his silent companion, had betrayed him. It had shown him its underbelly, its capacity for sudden, brutal violence. And he had been a spectator, a witness. Every shadow in his apartment seemed to deepen, to writhe with unseen threats. The gentle hum of the refrigerator now sounded like a growl. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, usually a comforting rhythm, became a countdown to some unknown, terrible event. His skin crawled. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the perpetrator could somehow see him, know that he had watched. The anonymity of his seventh-floor perch no longer felt like a shield. It felt like a spotlight. The entire city, which moments before had been a source of detached amusement, now felt like a hunting ground. And he, Ethan, was suddenly terrifyingly part of the prey. The transformation was absolute. Dallas was no longer a collection of buildings and streets, it was a landscape of fear. The quiet of the early morning hours, once a balm, was now pregnant with menace. Every distant siren previously ignored now seemed to be racing towards him. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of leaves in the wind outside his window, spoke of lurking danger. The comfort he had found in his nocturnal solitude had been a lie, a thin veneer over a horrifying reality. He was alone, truly alone, with the knowledge of what he had seen, and that knowledge was a heavy, terrifying burden. Section 5. The weight of witness: to speak or to cower. The immediate, overwhelming instinct was to hide, to pretend he hadn't seen, to draw the curtains, turn off the lights, and crawl into bed, pulling the covers over his head like a child frightened of the monster under the bed. But the image was seared into his brain, the struggle, the glint of metal, the scream, the slump. He couldn't unsee it, he couldn't unhear it. The silence from the alley below was now more terrifying than the scream itself. It was the silence of finality, of death. And he had watched it happen. The thought made him sick to his stomach, a cold, nauseous wave washing over him. He was a witness. The word itself felt heavy, dangerous. What was he supposed to do? Call the police? The thought sent a fresh jolt of fear through him. What would he say? I saw a murder from my window? Would they believe him? Or would they dismiss him as a crank, a lonely insomniac with an overactive imagination? He pictured the questions, the scrutiny, the inevitable involvement. He would have to give a statement, maybe identify someone. The figure he'd seen was cloaked in shadow, indistinct, but the fear they had projected was palpable. What if they saw him? What if they knew someone had watched? The thought of being dragged into that dark world, of facing that kind of violence, was paralyzing. The moral imperative gnawed at him. Someone was dead, or dying, down there, alone in the dark, a human being, their life extinguished in a brutal, terrifying instant. How could he live with himself if he did nothing? If he just let it become another unsolved statistic? Another forgotten tragedy in the sprawling indifference of the city? The victim deserved justice, or at least acknowledgement. Their final, desperate scream deserved to be heard by someone other than him. But the fear was a powerful counter-argument, whispering insidious suggestions of self-preservation. Stay out of it, keep quiet, it's not your problem. You'll only bring trouble on yourself. He picked up his phone, his hand trembling so violently he almost dropped it. 911, 3 simple numbers, a lifeline, or a doorway into a nightmare. He stared at the keypad, the numbers glowing faintly in the dim light. His thumb hovered over the 9. The silence from the street below pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating. He thought of the victim's scream again, a sound that would echo in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Could he ignore that? Could he truly live with the silence that followed, knowing he had contributed to it by his own inaction? The internal battle raged, a storm of fear versus conscience, each side pulling him apart. Section 6. A wall of silence. The indifference of the law. Finally, with a surge of desperate courage, or perhaps just an inability to bear the weight of his silence any longer, Ethan dialed. His voice was a shaky whisper when the dispatcher answered, a calm, professional tone that seemed worlds away from the horror he had just witnessed. He stumbled through his account, the words tumbling out in a disjointed, breathless rush. I saw something. In the alley, across the street from my building. I think someone was killed. He gave his address, his apartment number, his name. The dispatcher asked questions. When did it happen? What did you see exactly? Can you describe the perpetrator? Can you describe the victim? The questions were routine, procedural, but to Ethan they felt like an interrogation. He struggled to provide details, his mind replaying the scene in horrifying flashes. The figure was tall, dark clothing, that was all he could really say. The victim, smaller, struggling. It all sounded so vague, so flimsy, even to his own ears. He emphasized the scream, the metallic glint, the slumped figure. You need to send someone, quickly, please. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a pause that stretched for an eternity. Then the dispatcher's voice, still calm, still professional, but with an undertone Ethan couldn't quite decipher. We'll send a car to check it out, sir. Please stay on the line if you can. He waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He watched from his window, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Eventually, a patrol car did arrive, its blue and red lights painting fleeting, eerie strokes across his apartment walls. 2 officers emerged, their movements unhurried, almost casual. They shone their flashlights into the alleyway. Ethan watched, his heart pounding, expecting something. Shouts, discoveries, the grim confirmation of his fears. Instead, they spent a few minutes looking around, their beams cutting through the darkness, then seemed to confer briefly. One of them spoke into their radio. After what felt like an insultingly short amount of time, they got back into their car and drove away. Just like that, no ambulance, no detectives, no crime scene tape, nothing. Ethan stared in disbelief. Had they found nothing? Was he going mad? Had he imagined the whole thing? But the shattered teacup on his floor, the lingering scent of his fear sweat, the vivid, horrifying images burned into his retinas, they were real. He called back, his voice now tinged with desperation and a rising anger. "Did you find anything? The officers, they just left." The dispatcher's response was polite, non-committal. "Officers investigated the area, sir. There was nothing to indicate a serious incident. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Sometimes late-night altercations can seem more dramatic than they are." A misunderstanding? A scream like that? A slumped, unmoving body? His report, it seemed, had been filed away under minor disturbance or nervous caller. Section 7. Shadows in every corner. The bloom of paranoia. The police's dismissal was a cold slap in the face. It didn't bring relief. It brought a new, more insidious kind of fear. If they didn't believe him or couldn't find anything, then he was alone with this knowledge, truly alone, and the perpetrator was still out there, knowing what they did, perhaps knowing they hadn't been discovered. The thought chilled Ethan to the bone. He started to see shadows where there were none, to hear footsteps in the empty hallway outside his door. The city, his Dallas, was no longer just a backdrop. It was an active participant in his growing terror. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, every late-night shout from the street below seemed to be a direct message, a threat. Sleep became an impossibility. When he did drift off, exhausted, his dreams were a chaotic replay of the incident, the scream echoing, the shadowy figure turning, its face always just out of sight, but its eyes, he felt, fixed on him. He started to jump at sudden noises. The ring of his own phone made him flinch. He began to obsessively watch the alley from his window, half expecting to see the figure return, perhaps to look up at his very window. He imagined eyes watching him from the darkened windows of the buildings across the street. Was he being observed? Had the killer somehow known there was a witness? The line between rational fear and outright paranoia began to blur. He stopped his nightly ritual of tea and reading by the window. The window itself had become a source of dread, a portal to a horror he couldn't unsee. He kept the blinds drawn day and night, living in a self-imposed twilight. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. He replayed the dispatcher's words. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Were they subtly telling him to keep quiet, or were they genuinely incompetent? Or a more chilling thought, was it something else entirely? Something that meant the truth was being deliberately ignored? His mind, starved of sleep and fueled by fear, concocted increasingly elaborate and terrifying scenarios. He felt like a character in a noir film, a man who knew too much, hunted by forces he couldn't comprehend. His work began to suffer. He was distracted, jumpy, unable to concentrate. Colleagues noticed his haggard appearance, his nervous energy, but he couldn't bring himself to confide in anyone. How could he explain the terror that gripped him without sounding insane? Who would believe his story of a fleeting glimpse of murder in the dead of night, a story the police themselves had seemingly dismissed? He felt isolated, adrift in a sea of his own fear. The city, once a place of anonymous comfort, now felt like a labyrinth designed specifically to torment him. Its every street corner a potential ambush, its every shadow a hiding place for the unseen enemy. Section 8. The Haunting Echoes. A city stained with fear. Days turned into a week, then 2. No news reports surfaced about a body found in an alley, no follow-up calls from the police. It was as if the event had been swallowed whole by the city, erased from its official memory, but not from Ethan's. For him, Dallas had undergone a permanent, terrifying transformation. The familiar streets he walked to work, the parks he sometimes visited, the very skyline that had once filled him with a quiet sense of awe, all were now tainted. Every dark alleyway he passed was a potential crime scene. Every shadowy figure he encountered on a dimly lit street was a potential threat. The city was no longer his own. It belonged to the memory of that night. He found himself scrutinizing faces in crowds, searching for any flicker of recognition, any hint of the darkness he had witnessed. Was the killer among them, walking freely, living a normal life, while Ethan was trapped in his cycle of fear and sleeplessness? The thought was a constant torment. He avoided the news, yet perversely scanned headlines, looking for some mention, some validation of what he had seen. Nothing. It was a ghost story, and he was the only one haunted. The city's indifference was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. It was as if the life that had been extinguished meant nothing. The terror he felt was an overreaction, his witness an irrelevance. The unsolved, unacknowledged nature of the murder festered within him. It was an open wound, refusing to heal. If there had been an investigation, a resolution, perhaps he could have found some closure. But this lingering uncertainty, this sense that a terrible crime had gone unpunished and unnoticed, was a constant source of anxiety. He felt a strange, unwanted connection to the victim, a silent promise to remember what the city seemed determined to forget. But this remembrance was a heavy burden, one that was slowly crushing his spirit. He even revisited the alley in broad daylight once, his heart hammering. It looked ordinary, grimy, littered with mundane debris. There was no sign, no trace, as if the night had wiped its slate clean. His mental state continued to fray. The lack of sleep, the constant vigilance, the gnawing fear, it was taking its toll. He considered moving, leaving Dallas altogether, but a part of him felt tethered to this place, to the unresolved horror. Yet the alternative, staying, felt like a slow descent into madness. The city had become a mirror reflecting his own terror. The once welcoming lights of downtown now seemed to mock him, their brightness a stark contrast to the darkness he carried within. Dallas was no longer a home. It was a cage built of his own fear, the bars forged in the silence of that one terrible night. Section 9, Flight from the Spectre, leaving Dallas behind. The decision, when it finally came, felt less like a choice and more like a desperate act of survival. Ethan couldn't breathe in Dallas anymore. Every street corner, every late-night shadow, every distant siren was a fresh stab of fear, a reminder of the night that had stolen his peace. The city, once a backdrop for his quiet life, had become the main character in his ongoing nightmare. He realized that the police's indifference, the city's silence, meant that he was on his own. There would be no closure here, no justice sought that he could see. The murder would remain an unseen stain, a secret terror only he seemed to carry. And it was too heavy, far too heavy. He packed his bags with a numb efficiency, a man going through motions he barely registered. Each item he placed in his suitcase, clothes, books, the few mementos of his life here, felt like a piece of a past he was desperately trying to shed. He didn't know where he was going, only that it had to be away from Dallas, away from the window that had shown him too much, away from the alley that echoed with a silent scream. He looked around his small apartment, once his sanctuary, now a testament to his unraveling. The drawn blinds, the unwashed dishes, the faint lingering scent of stale fear. It was time to go. As he drove away, the Dallas skyline receding in his rearview mirror, he didn't feel relief. Not yet. Only a profound sense of exhaustion and a deep, lingering dread. The mystery of the murder remained, an unfinished chapter that he knew would haunt him wherever he went. Who was the victim? Who was the killer? Why had it happened? These questions would likely never be answered, and that uncertainty was a specter that would follow him. He had witnessed a tear in the fabric of ordinary life, a glimpse into the abyss, and he could never fully unsee it. The city lights blurred. Whether from distance or the unshed tears in his eyes, he couldn't tell. Leaving Dallas wasn't an escape from the memory, but perhaps an escape from its constant physical presence. He hoped that distance might dull the sharp edges of his fear, that a new city, new routines, might slowly help him rebuild some semblance of his former calm. But he knew with a chilling certainty that a part of him would forever remain in that seventh-floor apartment, staring out at the darkened street, listening for a scream that only he seemed to remember. The Dallas Nocturne had played its terrifying melody, and its tune would echo in the quietest corners of his mind for years to come. The terror was now a part of him, a dark passenger on his journey away from the city of his fear.